Hello everyone, Ariam here, and welcome to another episode of Draw and Discuss. Today we're going to be talking about Darwin's finches, or the Galapagos Island finches, and how these little birds are so important to the ideas of natural selection and the theory of evolution. You guys actually get a little bit of a treat today because you get to watch my process from start to almost finish. Normally I start my videos on step 2, which is the cleaned up sketch, but since this is a little bit more artsy-fartsy than I normally go, I decided to start recording my sketch process as well for this video. So what exactly are Darwin's finches or Galapagos finches? Well, either name works. They are a group of birds that live on the Galapagos Islands, and Charles Darwin studied them extensively in order to show that they, well, not proved, because theories are never proven, but that they strongly supported the ideas of natural selection and evolution. Just a side note, just because something is a theory doesn't mean we don't think it's true. The idea of that's just a theory is more of a layman's nomenclature for how we use theory. In science, theory just means something that is really supported. That's all it means. You add new information to a theory. A theory is never proven to be true. It just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger until it could become a law, or there's no evidence for it and it becomes weaker and is no longer a theory. Or it is just a disproven theory. Anyway, there are about 18 species of these Darwin finches. I drew the most famous 4, and they are actually not true finches. They're actually tangers because scientific grouping is weird and confusing. But let's get to the meat of this issue. These finches shared a common ancestor at some point. They are closely related, but they look very different today. There are birds with very large bodies and very thick, large beaks, and there are birds with tiny bodies and really thin beaks. So if these birds are all closely related and became separate species relatively recently in terms of evolutionary history, why do they look so different? Well, that's what Darwin looked into, and that's where the term natural selection was coined. Now, these finches were not the only animals on the Galapagos Islands that Charles Darwin studied, and they are not the only animals as a whole that he studied on and off the islands, but they are, in my opinion, the best example of what natural selection and evolution are talking about. The Galapagos Islands range a lot in their diversity of flora and fauna, how much plant life is around, and how hard they are hit by seasons. Although seasons on the Galapagos Islands are really more so classified by weather patterns called El Niño and La Niña, which is how warm the air currents and ocean currents are going to be for that next cycle. So as such, there are a couple islands that can be really sparse in terms of food. They mainly only have seeds as food sources for animals, and the plants that go to seed are completely dependent on what season or what forecast the island is experiencing at that time. As such, which birds survive to reproduce and which birds starve to death really depend on the weather and seed availability of that season cycle. Because of these really extreme waxing and waning periods, the individual genetic traits of these birds play a really strong role in their survival. And some of these genetic traits are linked to their body size and their beak size and shape. For example, the Magnerostris is the finch that you can see that has a really large bulky head with a giant beak. And this bird is excellent at cracking open really hard nuts to get to the seed inside, and they're good at crushing harder seeds. But then you can also have the warbler finches, which have teeny tiny bodies and are excellent at reaching into seed pods to kind of extract the seeds, like they're playing a game of Operation. During a dry season on several of the Galapagos Islands, only hard-shelled nuts and seeds are produced by the native plants, which means that the larger-billed finches survive more often, reproduce more often, and oftentimes their bill size becomes more extreme. But in wetter years, where softer seeds and smaller seeds are more prevalent, the smaller finches with more delicate and narrow beaks are able to outcompete those bigger birds, meaning that their numbers increase and the larger finches die off. As this happens season after season, the population numbers of these finches go up and down and up and down, and oftentimes at some point in a season, some of these species are even near total destruction. This harshness of the environment really means that genetic traits that help a species survive are going to be pushed towards the next generation and are likely to become more extreme. And this is how species form from one ancestor species to, for example, the 4 species I have here. There are, of course, so many other factors at play in terms of natural selection and evolution, such as isolation on these islands, how often birds are able to jump from one island to another, and other bird-based traits like song, but generally when talking about Darwin's finches, the beak is the star of the show. Now, there are definitely other species of birds where you can see this happening as well, especially in certain flycatcher and bee-eater families. As a population of animals, an original ancestor, expands into new ecosystems, it faces new pressures, and animals that can survive these pressures pass on their successful traits to the next generation. And over time, this leads to animals that are so different from that original ancestor that they are completely different species. This can also lead to hyperspecialization, where an animal is essentially built perfectly for its environment and is actually extremely delicate in terms of adaptability. If an animal is overspecialized, any small change in their environment makes those adaptive traits less adaptive, and they could be at risk of dying out. It's believed that this is what happened to saber-toothed cats in the Cenozoic era of North America. They were simply too specialized, and climate change and loss of their prey meant that they couldn't survive as well as other predators could. Now, just because Charles Darwin studied these animals in the 1800s doesn't mean there's no benefit to continually studying them today. In fact, these animals and other animals on the Galapagos Islands are some of the most studied in the world. In fact, it may be more important now than ever to study these species because of how quickly we can see natural selection at play in their populations. It gives us a really good idea as to how sensitive populations are at risk from things like climate change, increased weather severity, and pollution. In these past few months, I was actually able to meet firsthand some researchers that have been working on the Darwin Finch project for a really long time, Doctors Peter and Rosemary Grant. They visited my university and I got to meet with them one-on-one, and it was really amazing to see 2 people who have been married for a long time and doing research together on these islands, on these birds for over 40 years, and still seeing how important they are to the ecosystem even today. Overall, Darwinianism, natural selection, and the theory of evolution are really important ideas that have persisted through to today and essentially explain how the amazing biodiversity of Earth has happened. So that's it for today's Draw and Discuss. Do you have a favorite animal species that has some sort of crazy adaptation or is the perfect example of natural selection? If so, please share in the comments. I love learning about wacky animals with wacky adaptations. Make sure to do something good for yourself today, get some sunshine, and remember to smile.